Genesis chapter 19. We have been looking at biblical appeals, and last Wednesday night I began to relate to you the fact that there are a couple of situations in the Bible, a number of situations to our benefit are appeals where we see primarily women, because it's the most obvious kind of situation back in the ancient world in which you would see a husband or a man occupying an absolutely unassailable position of authority. And in the culture of the day, the person who occupied basically the weakest position with respect to that authority figure was typically a female, very frequently a wife. Nevertheless, we saw the tremendous influence that a number of different women had in the lives of men, where they made appeals to them not to change their minds, but to request that they consider making a new decision based upon new information. After that, we saw several situations of women who were wonderfully positioned to have tremendous influence in their husbands' lives, but rather than influencing their husbands for good, they influenced their husbands for evil. Last week I broached the subject of those who had opportunities to make appeals, but for some reason they didn't. We live in a culture, I think, that oftentimes people think that if they don't do anything, that means they're free and clear. Well, I didn't do anything, as if you have thereby discharged your responsibility. However, the Bible shows that each of us has a personal responsibility toward other people. You go all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, and we find that when Cain became furious with his brother Abel, and they had a difference of opinion and conviction and practice over the worship of the one true and living God, then Cain, apparently for reasons related to jealousy, slew his brother and killed Abel. And then when God spoke to him in an attempt to provoke his seared conscience, asked him if he knew where his brother was, and he essentially responded, "Am I my brother's keeper? Like, why are you asking me for him? Is it my job to look out for him today?" Well, and the rest of the Bible shows that yes, you are your brother's keeper. What that means is we have responsibility for other people in our lives, even people that we don't know. Used to be when the United States of America bore some semblance of a Christian culture. And when, at its peak, about the time of the American Revolution, really only about 15% of the population were members of a church and set under gospel preaching on a regular basis. But those 15% of the population had a powerful influence on the rest of the population, because they knew better than to stand around with their hands in their pockets with their mouths shut. If something needed to be said, they said it. If something needed to be done, they did it. And as a result, they had the effect of salt as a preservative and as light, illuminating those around them. And as a result of that, in almost every state in the Union, there were passed by legislators and signed by governors what were called Good Samaritan laws. The Good Samaritan law was obviously taken off of the parable of the Good Samaritan taught by the Lord Jesus Christ in his gospel according to Luke, where there was somebody that was on a path, and he was set upon by robbers and was beaten half to death. And then when several Jews from different parts of their society, there was the Levite and then there was the Pharisee, I think it was, and they saw this guy beaten to a pulp and on the side of the road, and they wouldn't have anything to do with it. They just passed right. It's not my responsibility. It's not my problem. I don't know this guy. I don't want to get involved. And then to kind of drive the point home, the Lord Jesus Christ in his parable talked about a Samaritan coming along and seeing the guy. Now, the Samaritans were universally hated by the Jews. The Jews were among the most racist people who ever lived on the earth, and anybody that wasn't a full-blood, purebred Jew was despised and hated. So you can imagine what kind of flack Rahab the harlot went through when she came into the Jewish community after the destruction of Jericho. You can imagine what kind of issues Ruth had to deal with when her first husband died and she was brought by Naomi back to Bethlehem, and so it goes on. But this Samaritan took care of the guy, transported him to a tavern, paid the person who was running the tavern to look after him, to feed him, and dressed his wounds, all of that kind of stuff. And the point of that parable is, because back in the Old Testament, the Jewish law is you are required to love your neighbor as yourself. That's an obligation that God has put upon every person. And it's codified into the law of Moses. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how did the Jews get around their race hatred and their opposition to anybody that wasn't Jew? Well, it has to do with how you define the word neighbor. The Jews, it's like the California legislature. I was talking to a judge on the phone today, and he's up in Northern California, and he was telling me, he said, you know, the legislators in Sacramento are absolutely crazy. He says they are nuts. They don't have a political theory. They don't know anything, and they just pass whatever crazy piece of legislation comes into their mind. Well, here's the latest one, and I think maybe they're going to vote on it tomorrow. And that is, they're going to redefine rainwater runoff. There is legislation before the California legislature that redefines runoff from rainfall as sewage, untreated sewage. Now, the reason they want to redefine natural water runoff as untreated sewage is because they already have laws that absolutely require that untreated sewage has to be taken care of to prevent public health hazard, no matter what the cost. And it is before the legislature tomorrow to redefine rainwater runoff as sewage. It would cost, estimates have varied, but one of the things that I saw was that it would cost every homeowner in California a minimum of $1,000 a year property tax. It's a way of getting around Proposition 13, which limits property tax increases. And so just and you know, in most states, and Jackie, you would know more about this. Aren't most states now passing laws making it illegal to collect rainwater on your property? Yeah, yeah. There was a guy up in Oregon who has been sentenced to 3 months in jail for collecting rainwater that falls out of the sky onto his property. Have we completely lost our minds, Isaiah? It's absolutely crazy. In other words, they don't want you to come into contact with any water except what comes out of a faucet that they... Anyway. Where was I? Okay. After we looked at the influence of these women for good in their husbands, we saw the influence of women for bad for their husbands. And last week I broached the subject of women who had opportunity to say something and they didn't say anything. And then I mentioned the Good Samaritan laws, which basically is a recognition of a biblical principle that if you see somebody in trouble, it's not a biblical mandate that you endanger your own life. It doesn't go that far. But if you have the opportunity to step in and help somebody, you have that moral obligation, okay? And so don't think that a person who just stands there and watches something happen and says nothing is not going to be held accountable by God for that. You will be held accountable by God for doing nothing. No, let me correct that. You are being held accountable by God for doing nothing, okay? And so that's the reason we treat these examples that we come to tonight. So if you would go to Genesis chapter 19, we're going to take up, first of all, Lot's wife. Lot's wife. What a gal. In Genesis chapter 19, beginning with verse 1, we see the tragic closing chapter in the life of a man named Lot. Verse 1, and there came two angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. That meant that he was one of the leaders of the city. To sit at the gate meant that he was like the mayor or assistant mayor or something like that, okay? He was an official of the city by this time. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, these two angels, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night. So he offered them his hospitality. What a nice guy. They didn't have Motel 6 back then, and so they couldn't keep a light on for you. And wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, you say, well, I would never do that. Inviting somebody into my house is way, way too dangerous. More dangerous now than it was then. You think it was safer then than it is now? Honestly, do you really believe that it was safer then than it is now? Okay, but before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us that we may know them. That word know, that's the same word that refers to Adam knowing Eve. That's knowing in a physical way. This is talking about sexual activity. And the men of Sodom want to be up to no good shenanigans with the two that are being housed by Lot. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have two daughters, which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. What? What? If you've never read this before, Lot is offering his two daughters to the men of the city to do with as they will, so that they will not take advantage of the two strangers for whom he is showing hospitality. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. He says, well, he has a high view of hospitality. Yeah, a high view of hospitality, however, should not come at the expense of a low view of your daughter's chastity. And they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. So they're now threatening Lot. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand. These men now, these are the angels. They put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness. In other words, these two angels of God blinded the men of Sodom who wanted to sexually molest these two men. They smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. Hold it a second. Hold it a second. Think of a normal human being who has an inclination to satisfy a sexual appetite. And he is quite forward about his desire. And then all of a sudden someone removes from him his eyesight. Wouldn't most people think that if you go blind while you're stimulated, you would be rather quickly unstimulated and be rather more concerned about your eyesight? But not these guys. They continued looking for the door even though they were blind to fulfill their urges. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. The angels are saying, we're going to get you and your family out of here right now. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of heaven is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot, by the way, I think they made a movie starring Keanu Reeves where he basically functions in this way, only they made the entire movie without once mentioning God. They get the plot line from Genesis chapter 19, but when they make the movie, they mention no mention of God. Of course, hooray for Hollywood. Verse 14, And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. They just laughed at him. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth, and set him without the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my Lord. In other words, I don't want to do what you want me to do. Verse 19, Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me, and I die. What? What? The two angels were going to destroy the city, get to the mountains. Oh, I'm afraid something bad will happen to me in the mountains. They're going to destroy the city, but you're afraid of what might happen in the mountains. You see how insane people get? How crazy their thinking is when they are unconcerned about the will of God for their lives. Verse 20, Behold, now this city is near unto thee, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape hither. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? Oh, I don't want to go to the mountains and be perfectly safe. Let me go to this little town where I will only risk fallout from the destruction of Sodom. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape hither, for I cannot do anything till thou become thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun was risen up upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the earth out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him. Verse 26, his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. You say, well, she was following him like she's supposed to do. Well, she was following him so that she could look back without him knowing. If she'd been in front of him and looked back, he would have noticed. But you notice anything unusual by its absence in this chapter? As a matter of fact, an examination of Lot's whole life would reveal this noticeable absence. What is it? Anybody got an idea? There's something completely missing from Lot's life. Throughout Lot's lifetime, there is no record of Lot's wife until the moment she dies. She is not mentioned in the Bible until the moment she dies. We don't even know when he married her. Was his wife from Ur of the Chaldees as he was? Did he meet her in Egypt when he went to Egypt with her uncle, with his uncle? Or maybe he was single when he parted company with Abraham and he lived near Sodom and then in Sodom and then he sat at the gate in Sodom, and maybe he met his wife in Sodom. That's brilliant. If he did that, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's where you want to meet your wife. You want to meet your wife on the bar stool next to you. Yeah, you want to meet your wife. You want to meet the mother of your children sitting next to you on the bar stool at the Drinkers Hall of Fame. Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, you say, well, they didn't have a Drinkers Hall of Fame back then. No, they had Sodom, the entire city. Now, maybe he didn't meet her and marry her there, but maybe he did. I don't know. We simply do not know. However, this we do know. When she, her husband, and their two daughters, apparently the two daughters that were not married, because the ones who were married stayed with their husbands in Sodom and perished. These two daughters, they were forcibly removed from Sodom by the angels. You notice, if you'll read the passage again carefully, the angels literally grabbed them around the wrist and took them out of the city. So they were forcibly removed from Sodom by the angels. This wife, however, disobeyed the command not to look back. Do not look back. Verse 17. And she looked back to her own destruction. What a sad legacy this woman left. Probably because of her love of the worldliness of Sodom. You know, she liked to go clubbing. She liked the strobe lights. She liked the cocktails. She liked snorting a line. She liked doing all that kind of stuff. She liked all that kind of stuff. But we read of no appeal from her to her husband to stay out of Sodom. There is no record of her urging him to do right. There is no appeal to her husband to leave Sodom once they're there, and there is no appeal from this woman to protect their daughter's virtue when her husband offered their daughters to the Sodomites. Now, he might have offered them thinking, well, I'm going to offer it to these guys, but these guys don't like girls, so they're going to be okay. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You say, well, Pastor, that's horrible. Horrible, you say. Horrible, you say. Not much more horrible in the end than fathers who withhold spiritual nurture from their children for fear of their unsaved family members, withhold spiritual nurture from their children for fear of the comments and the disposition of lost friends, and perhaps for fear of the disapproval of their wives who look on and make no comment about their man putting her children at risk. Parents don't have a neutral obligation to do no harm. That's not good enough. It is not good enough to be a dad who does no harm. It is not good enough to be a mom who does no harm. Because by doing no harm, you do harm. By doing no harm as a mom, you do harm. Because it is assigned to you as a task of God when He loans you your children. And the Bible is very clear that children are loaned to parents. They belong to God. He doesn't loan them to you to do bad for, and He doesn't loan them to you to do nothing for. He loans them to you to have a positive spiritual impact in their lives. Now, it's up to them to decide whether they're going to follow your lead or not. But a father or a mother, and we're talking about Lot here, needs to be able to pillow his head at night, knowing that he has sought to lead his children. Now, they may get mad. Too bad. Too bad. Dad's answerable to God. Mom needs to be able to pillow her head at night, knowing that regardless of the decisions her children have made, she has sought to lead them to do right. You say, well, what happens if the kid gets mad? Too bad. Too bad. God didn't give to a woman when she bore and then delivered a child a friend, a pal, a buddy. God gave to that woman a child to raise. Amen? So, think about what might have been different had Lot's wife appealed to her husband to do right. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not relieving him of the responsibility of being a dad. He is 100% responsible to be the man he ought to be toward those girls. But I'm wondering what might have been different had his wife appealed to her husband to do right. Had she met the requirements to properly make an appeal, all of the conditions. Could it be that Lot might never have entered Sodom? Oh, honey, are you sure we need to go there? Because we're doing really good here. Might Lot have never offered his daughters to those wicked men? Might Lot not have become drunk with wine and sired children by incest with his daughters after their deliverance by angels as a direct result of those two girls realizing Daddy had no concern about our chastity, so why should we have concern about our chastity? If Dad's not concerned about my moral purity, why should I be concerned about my moral purity? We're never going to know what might have been had she appealed, because she didn't appeal. Not one word. I think it's incumbent upon every woman who is proposed by a man to marry, when she receives a marriage proposal, I think one of the things that woman ought to mull over in her mind is not if, but when he makes a really dumb decision. Because guys make dumb decisions. Guys do really stupid things. Okay? Guys are, and Brian is back there smiling. He's got a Master of Arts in dumb decisions. I have a doctorate in dumb decisions. And the 42 years that my wife and I have been married, that woman has had to cope with a bunch of really bad decisions that I've made. Okay? But one of the things I think a woman needs to consider is, if I don't have the starch to make an appropriate appeal to this guy, then I shouldn't marry him. If I'm afraid, if I'm so afraid of the guy that I would go along with him even when I knew he was wrong, I probably shouldn't marry him. Okay? Because as a Christian, I believe that a woman stands equal at the foot of the cross before God with any man. And while there is in the Bible this divinely instituted subordination in marriage, that does not mean that a woman should turn off her brain and be a Stepford wife. Okay? It's not the zombie apocalypse where only the women are zombies, you know. And the way to deal with them is boom, you know. That's not right. There's going to come times when a woman is absolutely convinced this man is making a wrong decision. I need to make a well-formulated appeal to him based upon the relationship that I have with him. And it should not be a relationship based on fear. Not at all. If you're scared of the guy, don't marry him. If you think he's the kind of a guy that you might get scared of, don't marry him. Because no Christian woman has any business being afraid of a husband. So, well, what happens if he's nasty? You shouldn't have married him. Okay? And there's always the 15-inch cast iron skillet. I actually know a woman. I actually know a woman that she got married to a guy and he became abusive. Now, this is not pastoral counseling. I'm just telling you what happened. This is not prescriptive. This is historical. Okay? It's historical, but it's historical. And he was being really nasty in his treatment of her, and she got scared, and she was pregnant at the time. And so she waited until he sat down in his lounge chair, and she came up behind him, and she did a top spin forehand with a 15-inch skillet and knocked him clean out. And before he regained consciousness, she was moved out. Now, am I going to criticize her? Am I going to advise her to do that? No, but I'm not going to criticize her either. Because that clown she was married to, he deserved that kind of nonsense for the way he was treating her. But the point that I try to make is, I don't think that any woman should be afraid of her man. Okay? If you're afraid of your guy, boy, something went wrong someplace. And I don't think you should ever surrender the greatest tool you have for dealing with people who have positions of authority, people who have what seems to you to be an unassailable position, and that is a biblical appeal. I think we're going to wait, Lord willing, until next time to deal with the next example, which is Abigail. Abigail, if you'll recall, was masterful in her appeal to David, but we find no record in the Bible of her ever attempting an appeal to the man she was married to. That's terrible. Does anybody have a question on this portion of Scripture that I've dealt with this evening?